by letting you know what we're going to be talking about. Um, this session is really about using technology with learning spaces and why we design learning spaces the way it is now and going into the future. But what is it in it for DLT staff? Well, as DLT staff, we are enablers who work with academics, and hopefully we enable better teaching and also learning outcomes for our students. And so this session here will give you an idea of learning activities based on why we design our learning spaces, um, partnering up with technology. So the first thing is, while we're talking about technology, I thought I just immerse you, everyone here, in a technology called Poll Everywhere. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this technology, but I just thought I immerse yourself in this because just like any time I'm teaching, I also use this technology to get to understand my students in terms of learning and my audience as well. So if you're still needing the URL, please use your mobile phone, and the URL is at the bottom right here, or just pop another browser and just pop in that URL for me. So the first thing I wanted to do was come back to the audience here, and I want you to think about what you're really good at, and other people have recognized you to be good at this particular skill. So I want you to think about something that you're really, really good at, and I want you to now think about how did you get there? How did you learn that particular skill in the context of a this taxonomy, this simple taxonomy here, so 1 to 5, and I want you to yeah, go into that URL there, and now if you can just vote, well, not vote, but just select how you became good at that skill. And if you're still wondering where that URL is, it's that at the top here. Okay, looks very interesting so far. Okay, so while you're voting there, I'm just going to move on. Um, we're going to revisit this part here, but you can see that trial and error is there. You've got practicing, someone showing me, and mentoring. So someone like mentoring and showing me is pretty much pretty strong, coming out very strong. Actually, practicing is catching up as well, but mentoring and someone showing is still coming out very strong at 62%. Wow. Okay, it's very interesting. It's still dynamic moving. So I want to cut to the other scene here, and I wanted to talk more about constructive alignment, which is a subject and assessment design methodology. And a lot of the academics, I hope, would be aware of this methodology. New academics would be aware of this methodology by having to attend the graduate certificate in learning and teaching. And DLT staff, I'm sure, I think, would be aware of this method as well. And really, it's about outcomes. The outcome is what is it that we want the students to learn, and then designing assessment activities and learning activities around that outcome. So the best way to really kind of show you and illustrate it is this picture here on the right-hand side by Deborah Murdoch and Alison Matthews. And you can see here the train. The train has the engine at the front. The engine is what drives that train, which is the learning outcome. And then the other carriage that is driven is by assessment and also teaching activities. Now, I want to change that to learning activities because good pedagogy is about learning and how that learning frames teaching. But in terms of constructive alignment, learning outcome guides assessment and learning and teaching outcome activities. In this session, for the sake of time, I'm just really just going to talk about learning and teaching activities in relation to the design of learning spaces and our technology. So learning activity is guided by what we call learning strategies. If you think about learning strategies, it's really about the map or how do we do it? What kind of um, things can we do to meet the outcome? And then within that, if you break that down, there's learning activities inside the learning strategies. And really, it's mainly focusing around active learning. So the whole session, I'd like to just revolve around active learning. So the first thing I wanted to do is now coming back to you again, is to understand your level of what active learning is. So if you just use your browser or your mobile phone again, just let me know the keywords or two keywords of what do you think active learning means. Okay, engagement, and I know who that is coming from. Doing, okay, great. Yeah, constructing, yep. Thinking, understanding, yep. Participation, participating, thinking, testing. Okay, really, really good. Pa I see the word passively there. Okay, what's involved? Yep, interaction, supported, thinking. So you can see there, think about that graph that we had, and it was really inclined towards people how they learn in our group here is through, mentoring and someone showing them how to do things, or trial and error, or practicing, and all that uh, is encompassing around this here is active learning. So I think the group really understands what active learning is. So I'm going to move on to the next one is let's define together, and I think we all agree now, of active learning. Um, According to the Australian Council on Open Distance and E-Learning, which I've been involved with, Phillip has been involved with this project as well, is how do we define active learning? And then we provided a lot of the resources for learning spaces for the Australasian audience as well. And this is linked to Charles Sturt's definition of active learning. So there's a few references that I wanted to focus on. The first one is active learning is about engaging the students in teaching and learning exchange as opposed to transmission approach, which is kind of like the passive approach. So here is the active approach versus or opposes the passive approach. Now the bottom one here is I'm going to be talking a lot about this one here. This is about students doing things and thinking about what they are doing. So you can see your answers are really kind of, I guess, um, it's not no surprise, but it's wrapped around students doing things and thinking about what they're doing. So so I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into a neuroscientist who specializes in about the brain. This is Natalia Bilton, who teaches human anatomy, and she's going to talk. I'm just going to show you this video for 2 minutes on what she's talking about, how the brain works and how the brain learns. So I'm just going to jump over to, oops, the video.
I know that teaching or learning is about building connections between neurons, ultimately when you boil it down. Okay, that's what you're doing when you're learning. So here is a cell, a neuron, here is another neuron, and of course it's this time lapse that's going quicker than normal. And so what you want to do is you want to build connections. The more you learn, or when you learn something, two connections, two neurons, their connection between them gets stronger. Okay, so neurons that fire together wire together. So that's what you're doing when you're teaching someone. That's what you're doing when you're actually doing repetition. You're getting connections, neural networks developing. And my students always get cranky at me because I always go, I can't grow your dendrites for you. You have to grow them yourself. Okay? And you can only grow your brain cells if you do something active. You can't grow brain cells if you just sit there and look and watch. You have to do something. Okay?
Okay, so yeah, she's just reiterating there is that you have to do something in order to grow brain cells, in order to uh, strengthen the networks between brain cells. So that's the premise that I'd like to focus around, including about students doing things and thinking about what they're doing and how does learning spaces help that. So let's talk about active learning strategies, and inside that will contain learning activities. And these learning activities, I'm going to show you some case studies around Charles Sturt University that different academics have been using in order to encourage students doing things and thinking about what they're doing. So this taxonomy here is from the Interact2 site, and it's called the Pedagogy and Learning Design site, and it's developed by CSU staff, CSU DLT staff, so us as a collective, especially from active learning practitioners and also educational designers. So the first strategy is called active lectures. And active lectures can contain a variety of modes. So you could start with a presentation and then mix that up with YouTube and animation. Um, a really strong connection, to build strong connection, is through gamification or polling. Polling, like the way I've done there, is to understand my audience, to understand what their understanding is from past experience, and then also understanding where my students' learning level is at. I can use such activities, really high level engagement, which is called peer instruction, and then think, pair, share, which Rachel is going to show you in the context of H5P and learning spaces. So going back to Natalia here, her structure of active lecture is she would only show 20 minutes and no longer than that, especially even complex content as well. And then what she does is she's given here an example of using a gamification kind of mode. This is using Socrative here, and she would divide the cohort into groups, and then we would answer the quiz based on her teaching. And it's become really engaging. You can see here the participants are smiling and talking with each other, negotiating what the right answer is, but it's fun. It's not just fun, but it's also about engaging the students, and the students are actually forming that strong network in their brain. The other thing is it gives the academic where the students' learning is at. Another activity she would mix up would be doing something like kinesthetically. She would get out the student's hand and get each other to draw on their hand if they were learning about the anatomy of the hand. And then they would talk about the different parts, the names of it. So students doing something and thinking about what they're doing because they need to explain that to their group as well. This one here is peer instruction, the graphic design class that I ran. This is about market segmentation, which is really hard to understand, especially when students are expected, they came to class to understand about creative design. But creative design doesn't sit in silo. It actually has a purpose, and the purpose is serving their audience. So understanding about the market and segmenting that market. So what I've done here is um, after a few weeks, the students get a strong view of their market. I came back and I gave them options, different options, and they had to vote in the right market for this type of campaign. Now, if I get a variety of different answers and not the right answer, then I get the students to turn around to each other in groups to negotiate. And this is where the secret of the active learning comes in, is this is where they teach themselves, uh, they teach each other, they're thinking about what they're doing, and then they have to articulate by explaining why they chose that answer through research, through logic, and through their readings as well. Um, and so I can see the answers will change every time I ask them to vote again, and I would add extra teaching notes to that so that they can understand better, and then get the students to vote again, and then see if the answer is all correct. If it's not correct, then we just keep going, and they would negotiate and talk to each other and teach each other about the different aspects of market segmentation. And in the end, they actually end up teaching each other, and they became experts in their little field. Uh, um, Not like um, kind of full experts, but at least some sort of content readiness in terms of doing their assignments by actually working with each other on this. Um, so spaces do tell a story. If we're looking at active lectures, this is a space here which is called the C.D. Blake Theatre, and it lends itself to active lectures by the technology that we have, but also how inviting it is with lots of lighting and contemporary design. This is another space here, which is, I believe, in Bathurst or Wagga. Okay, I can't remember which campus on that, but what this is you can use those activities that I showed you. Academics can use this in this type of space, or in flat floor space, which has tables that encourages group work and movable chairs as well. So that same space is now filled with lots of students, and the students come together to get to know each other, but also work together in a common problem. This space here is in Bathurst, which is again, it's a presentation space, but it can be used as active lectures by using such activities as before. This is the engineering building in Bathurst. This one here is an IVT space, which you can see here, this is an imaging lecturer who teaches Port Macquarie and also Wagga as well. So the way to connect and engage the students, she would use Kahoot, and that basically will help her understand where the student's learning level is at, and then she can adjust her teaching by using this digital platform, but also allowing the students to now get involved in doing things and thinking about what they're doing. Now, learning spaces doesn't have to be inside. Our Charles Sturt's definition of learning spaces is that it is not defined by walls. So here we've got learning spaces that is outside. This is a paramedicine lecturer, and his philosophy in teaching is that students have, in order for cooperative learning and also group learning, students have to be comfortable with themselves and others so that they can share. It encourages sharing if they are comfortable with each other. So he takes them outside, doesn't make them feel like they're in a classroom, have some social activities, but then also ingrain that also in teaching some of the content about paramedicine. So he would use the trees, the branches as metaphors for arteries and veins, and also the different aspects of the landscape about the heart as well. The next strategy is called problem-based learning, which is PBL. This is about students problem solving. a certain problem or a scenario. And this is prevalent in health and medical courses, including vet science in CSU. An example would be the BMS 317 here. Um, and this is a lecturer who teaches first, started with a lecture, and then get the students into groups. And using Adobe Connect in breakout rooms, where they actually, each one of the groups have two patients. She would come up with a line where it describes the patient. They have to build a case, and then they have to build diagnosis for that case as well. Um, and they have to do that in a certain time, like when they're paramedics out in the industry. Um, Now they work within a group to share their knowledge and to find out what is the best way to diagnose this case. So they've got to build the case, and then they have to build the diagnosis on that as well. So here's the answer using Adobe Connect inside a learning space uh, that that encourages group thinking. Um, and then once they've done that, they have to prepare. They have to do a presentation to the whole class on their their conclusion on that. This gets recorded because it's on Adobe Connect, and then they can review that, or she would show this to the online students as well. This same space is this one here, where it encourages the design of the space encourages group group working, group work. Again, this is a space in Wagga, the newly refurbished space in Building 13 that was finished last month. Again, we've changed the space in order to make it inviting, lots of lighting, uh, and then that will be encouraging to group work as well with new technologies and writable surface areas. So just going back to BMS 317, once the students build the case, they go into an authentic space, which is this space here, where they actually practice on a mannequin on a scenario. This building here is the Bathurst Engineering Space, and it's called a maker space because it says come in here and make something or problem, solve something, um, be active. And so that's what the student did, and this is the Rube Goldberg. They use that space to make the or problem solve their project and making things. And they're using, again, this is a collaborative space in the engineering room where they're using it to build their project. The same space can be used by the creative industry students. So here you've got a lecturer who is providing them with a project, and they have to come up with a solution by the end of the day. And this is a space where it encourages students can move around into each groups. You've got enough digital tools and also writable surface in order to encourage group work. So the next strategy is called cooperative learning. And cooperative learning is about individual learning, but it's individual learning in the context of group work and how we learn in a group in order to learn for ourselves. So we got such activities as, again, peer instruction and think, pair, share. So going back to BMS 317 here, this is Adobe Connect with breakout groups, and they're learning as a community or as a group, and then in order to get individual understanding. This is a screenshot of Socrative here, and groups, um, they come together and they can use them to answer quizzes. So blue, magenta, lime, the different colors represent the groups, and they have to work together in order to seek the right answer. This is Nicole Mitchell. I think everyone in DLT would recognize her, will know her. And she's an educational designer as well as a lecturer. Um, this is a this is a scenario where she's teaching about corporate social responsibility, and there's two schools of thought in terms of broad view and narrow view. So the broad view is that companies fit within a wider range of community, so therefore they have to think about the community. The narrow view is companies exist so that they can make a profit for their shareholders. Therefore, they should have the freedom to think about how they want to move their company. So the space itself is designed in a way where it's discursive, allows them to debate on the two schools of thought. She's the ability where the space can provide in a corporate kind of setting where they have meetings and they have to debate and talk. Um, and by the smile on their face, they're actually enjoying what they're doing in a real world context. This space here, the students, this student here that's leaning forward, decided to write his study notes onto a piece of concrete. And then other students noticed his study notes and they were encouraged to write their own study notes. And then they ended up sharing each other's study notes and found out that sometimes they've missed some parts of the content. And so when they are working together, it becomes more, it strengthens their study and their understanding because they can rely on each other if they miss anything. The same concept is here in Bathurst room 325. This is the reason why we designed this room to have all walls to be writable is so that we can have cooperative learning. So this encourages students to now write their notes onto the wall and then other students can see it and can also discuss and say, hey, you've missed this part, or I didn't know um, I didn't know that that's what you mean. Oh, um, um, I understand it better because this is what you wrote. Or so that's the kind of feedback that the students were getting by working together, and the space itself encourages that. So we started to design more spaces. So this one here is the Albury 754, which was finished last month again. And so we designed spaces for writable surface so that team discussion, this is a comment from one of the lecturers. So it enables team discussion regarding client assessment. So it's a science subject. Ease of access because it's floor to ceiling and able to stand back and see the work as well as inviting group work activities. So this space here has a smart board and we can show the problem. The problem here is to work out the amount of the number of triangles, and you can work it out by yourselves, but it's much harder. But if you work together in a group where this piece of technology, which is the smart board, and they can actually draw and uh, discuss together, then they would more likely come up with the right answer. But what happens is they are talking, thinking about what they're doing, doing and thinking about what they're doing. This one here is a lecturer who uses the learning space and Adobe Connect, where she connects the off-campus students. Some of these students are at home with the on-campus students, and she's teaching them at the same time. Okay, so the last strategy is scenario-based learning. And this here is an example of the occupational therapy practice. So this is if any academic who wants to teach about models from the industry or an acronym that students have to remember, then this is a good activity. Uh, in this example, this is called the Canadian Practice Performance Framework, and they have to learn this. So what it is students have to come up with or think about a scenario where they had contact with a medical profession. So, for example, their GP, and then they have to explain their interaction with them. And each time they explain, they have to jump to each acronym or each one of the stages here. And if they once when they're explaining and if they missed a stage, they'll have to jump to this next stage here. And then the students around them have to discuss why did that medical practitioner miss that, and how could they do better? Because one day they will become medical practitioners, and so they they learning how to share this knowledge, but also it's a way to remember this model as well by doing things and then thinking about what they're doing. Here's another example again. This is the creative students in the Bathurst engineering. By the end of the day, they have to come up with a media company, and they have to. So the teaching and learning tool encourages them for group work and problem solving. Um, our last scenario is our paramedic students where they're doing a scenario, and in order to work out where their learning is at, they have to come up with a poster, and within that poster, they have to use everyday objects that they're familiar with to use it as a metaphor to explain about the human body and how the human works based on certain drugs that they diagnose or certain drugs that they would prescribe to the patient on that by using this poster. So as you can see here, spaces with active learning activities do help us learn, and they do encourage active learning. And that's the reason why we design the space the way we design it, in order to provide different opportunities and different activities that can activate inside the spaces. Um, that way, it helps students do things and thinking about what they're doing. Um, so you can see here, just going back to how did you become good at what you do? This is the reason why active learning is important, but active learning will guide the way we design our learning spaces. So lastly, I just want to, before I give it to Rachel, I just wanted to explain to you about the model of peer instruction, because I believe that this type of activity, you can use this in lecture spaces. You can do this with 5 students, 500 students, um, and it helps, it gets the students now back into the main character of, they are the main character of learning. So I won't I won't run through the activity because we won't have time, but I want to show you the model of peer instruction, which is you start out with a lecture or kind of like a flipped classroom where students will learn the concepts outside the class, and then start the class with a small lecture or ask the question, and then get the students to vote. And here I'm using poll everywhere, and then we check the answer, and then everyone gets to see the answer. And if there's a mixture of right and wrong answer, then they would do peer discussion. And then this is where they teach each other, especially with new concepts. Some students understand it better than others. So they're actually teaching each other on that and negotiating what is the right answer. Um, and then we vote again. And then we see where the answers start to change. And when the students see that the answers, the poll starts to change, they get more engaged because now they're trying to work out, okay, is my answer correct? Or maybe I should explain it this way. I've got to think the way I articulate it. And then we vote again until we get mostly right, and then we do a debrief on that. Before I pass it on to Rachel, what we've done in order to support DLT staff, but also academic here, is we've come up with a Learning Space portal. This Learning Space portal is on demand and just in time. So you can scan, say, for example, your mobile phone with a QR code. It'll come up with this space here, for example, and then it has two choices. You can learn about the activities that you can do in that room, and then you can also use the technology. And these technology here are just in time, which is only 1 minute long. So especially like for myself as well, who go on holiday, come back and teach, and I forgot how to use a wireless mic. Even now, I probably forget how to even dock it properly. So it shows you best practice of using the wireless mic or the the document camera. So we've had this out. It's only a pilot model at the moment, but we've had lecturers who said, "Oh, I didn't know how document cameras work this way," and now they're using it within their design of their subject as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to move on to now to Rachel, and then at the end we're going to have Q&A questions. Sorry, Q&A session on that. So Rachel, whenever you're ready to go.
Okay, I'll just get my presentation up. Okay, is that fine, Phil? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, yeah, that's all good. Perfect.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk about active learning made easy and how we can engage students using technology. Now I'm going to talk about Think, Pair, Share, which I'm sure most of you know, but we'll just do a bit of a refresher. So Think, Pair, Share is thinking about a question that you pose to your class. They have a couple of minutes to think about it. Then you can just decide on the size of your class whether you put them in pairs or in groups, and then they go away and discuss, and then they all come back as a big class, and depending on how many you've got, you can get a couple to share their ideas. Think, Pair, Share can be used in many different spaces, the flat floored space and the tiered space. It's very easy to use, engages the entire class, and it's very good for students that are passive or introvert because they may not want to speak to the whole class, but they feel more confident in a smaller group, and then they might be happy to share back to the big class. So we're not going to do the activity today, but an example of an activity would be you pose a question such as, in your teaching, what are some issues you face in terms of student learning in your class? And you can collate those answers by typing them on screen where everybody can see them. And then in pairs or groups, they can choose one of the issues. And then you give them like 5 minutes to go away and discuss the strategies. And then again, they come back to the bigger class, and the ones that want to share can share back to the whole class. Now, a tool to use to engage students, and this can be used on or off campus, is H5P, and it supports the learning strategy that I showed, such as Think, Pair, Share. And this is a formative tool, so you can gauge your students' understanding and their process, and also making it more interactive will enrich students' learning. So I'm just going to show you quickly a couple of H5P contents I've created. Okay, so on this video, there's two little dots here, and that's where I've put my questions. So if I won't play it because you won't be able to hear it. But as it goes up to the question, it will stop. So in your class, they can be listening to this. Then you click on here, and here is your question. Then they have a think about it, and then you put them in their groups where they discuss it, then come back and share. And another one I created is a hotspot. I've just uploaded the photo. And for a discussion, I've put a question on here that I can then share with the class and have that same discussion.
And I just wanted to jump in there and say that this type of activity really kind of fits towards the active lectures. And so you could, like academics can show this in front of the class, and then now you're mixing that up with a video to support your teaching, but then it helps, it reminds you to stop in this area and then poses a question on that. And the students can log in and also type in those questions, and then you come back to one big class and then present your work as well to share. So
Yep, and
over back
sorry
to you,
too, I
Rachel.
realise I've probably spoken a bit quick, but Phil and I are happy to have a discussion.
So yeah, so Rachel, have you finished?
I've finished, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so basically that's pretty much it. And now we're just going to turn it over to some questions and answer. Um, Probably like I'd like to throw in another idea is if you can think of another learning strategy that you've done as well, or you wanted to share a learning activity, that would be great as well.
There's a couple of questions in the chat too, Phil.
Yes, I missed that one. Okay. Uh, would you mind just typing those question again? Because I'm just otherwise I'll just have to scroll and search for it. But if anyone else, I'm just gonna probably provide um, enable microphone to everyone, and hopefully we could just talk like
Yeah,
everyone
Nicole,
can.
it would be good to know which props you used in your class today.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, it's
Hello.
Nicole Mitchell here. So today I had teaching my marketing class, Marketing 110, first year. We talked about consumer behavior and different levels of decision making depending on the purchase. So I brought in a whole box of stuff that I'd gathered around from the house, everything from the Harry Potter wallet and the Beanie Boo to toothpaste, salt, a box of chocolates wrapped in wrapping paper and so forth. So basically I went around with my big box, and the students had a lucky dip and they picked a product each. And then along the wall I just stuck notes, the labels of low involvement, high involvement, impulse buy, habitual, and I got them to sort those products and actually do this in pairs, but with a product each, and talk about where these things went. And then we went through the process. We discussed each of them. I asked the students why they placed them in that space, and it just made it a bit more fun, and also really got them thinking and having something physical. Like a prop. If you're teaching face to face, I think the students seem to really enjoy that. And yeah, it worked really well, I think, and they seem to get it. They got most of them right anyway, which was good, and it led to a lot of conversation then, which led me to then we went back to some of the theoretical concepts which were picked up in the example. So I had that to refer back to in the more complex stuff that we got into a little bit later, and it was fun.
That's
That's
great.
great. Thanks, Nicole. Can I just, Nicole, if you don't mind, just add one of your student feedback that you had before talk in the context of time.
Oh, okay, yeah. So using the active learning, this is for an ethics class I did last year. In my feedback, it did say one of the students' feedback said, normally I dread these 3-hour classes because that's how we were timetabled in Fort Macquarie. But I didn't even look at my watch once. I so enjoyed the learning. So I think that's not sustainable all the time, but I thought, that's really good when you get engaged learners that don't even look at their watch. I did not either look at my watch. I was also engaged with the process, and I think it makes for a richer learner experience.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so it's pretty, so I've spoken with the paramedic students in BMS 316, and they said, well, wow, my class goes so fast. So here we've got a comment that says renovated space have been encouraging more active learning. In other words, you established an actual link between the upgrades and the improved. Um, we've had we had feedback where the new upgrades are more inviting for the students to come along. The other thing is on the academic kind of point of view is that the academics several of them have said that now it's open up to a better option in terms of choosing different ways or activities, so it's more flexible. And that's why we call it the flexible learning classroom.
Thanks, Phil. I was just curious as much as anything. The rooms look great and the strategies are really excellent. It's just curious around what extent there was sort of a relationship between, the fresher rooms and the improved practice and everything that's had underneath it. So, cheers.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to. I mean, it's still. I'd like to do. I don't know how, but I'd like to do a methodology of how to measure, the link between improved activities and the refurbished rooms as well. Um, we do get, like, if you ask all the students, I've got video recordings of international students saying that they come into these spaces and they don't feel like they're coming into a learning or a classroom. They feel relaxed. It's inviting. There's a lot of light, and so it makes them feel they want to learn more. And the other thing is their room, when they go home, their rooms are messy, and the space design itself encourages them to come to uni and just to do their assignments and work as well. Okay, so Aline talks about where is the H5P guidelines situated. Aline, do you mean the Learning Space portal, or do you mean like it's linked to a web page? Yeah, that's a good question. We can provide that link later on. This session really is just about kind of just giving you an idea of why we designed that space, the spaces we design, and also what kind of activities around the university have people using it for. Okay, so external environments, sorry. So borrowing from external environments, industry, etc. The buzz has been um, for some, and it feels like we have a long way to go here in that regard on that.
Yeah, sorry, Phil.
Yeah,
I was just saying, I think they're awesome spaces, but it feels like we've got a long way to go, like getting students from different subjects and different courses and that working together in these spaces at a wider scale. That was all my. I was just curious if that was on the radar. It was a long way of saying that question.
yeah. Hopefully the Learning Space portal would help that. So I've been around different universities where they would say, oh, they would describe the activity for the space and how you can use the activity. But rather than doing that, I thought I'd rather use case studies so that people can go, well, if colleagues in CSU can do this in this space, maybe I can do it as well. Um, and then link that to how do I create that activity in that space. So hopefully the Learning Space portal will help that along. Phillip Ace is saying that Sam Parker can help with the H5P link. With that, Rachel, who's also ESE, can help. I'm sure a lot of the EDs are very well versed in H5P and all the other technology, including Poll Everywhere.
Phil, if I can make a comment just quickly on the cross-disciplinary teams by Jed. The what DFM is clearly putting forward as the way to go is to make physical learning spaces, environments multi-purpose, so that everything's on wheels and mobile and all of that, so things can move around. obviously, when you come to dedicate discipline spaces, like laboratories or dentistry areas, things change a little bit. But even there, in dentistry here on the Orange campus, where the medical school will be, they are looking at cross-disciplinary areas where the medical students and the dentist students could use the same laboratory. So I think that is a philosophy that's there. And just the second thing that in a recent presentation I did, I emphasized that learning design is the critical thing in ensuring that the physical space design actually result in impact on the learning. So that because you can design a physical space beautiful, and when you get there, people just use it for lecturing. So, the critical thing is the learning design to build in active learning and constructive alignment in the design to ensure that the physical space will actually deliver. The physical space by itself can't do it. In my view, it is the learning design that's the critical piece.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So hopefully this session will kind of provide that. These are some of the activities that the academic does, Philip, and then that's really coming from the learning design, the design side of it. Yeah. And talking about cross-disciplinary, practices, uh, if you have a look at Port Macquarie, most of our learning spaces are used by various different schools. Then that example there with the engineering space, you've got the creative students actually using that hall, the student space, and that encourages group work and also PBL. Um, it also has a reflective space on the side, so that's independent learning as well. So it's just a matter of, understanding the direction we're going through in design of learning spaces for Charles Sturt, and the reason behind that, and really now looking at learning design. So when we are enablers, because we are enablers for academics, and we can enable good design so that learning spaces, the way we design our learning spaces encourages different variety of activities. Yeah, good point, Nicole. So Nicole mentioned that unfortunately, due to timetable restrictions, learning and teaching styles may need to be adapted to suit the space that lecturers are allocated. So here, she's talking about space is guided, space can guide the different activities because of timetable restrictions. So in that, that's the reason why I and Rachel and myself are predominantly kind of just introducing two types of activities which can run in any space. So whether you're like lecture space or a flat floor space, you can use peer instruction or think, pair, share with H5P and poll everywhere. So so technology definitely will help that as well. And again, going back to um, the thinking about the subject design and the learning design. Okay, so thanks, Pam, for the insight into the literature as well. There is a lot of literature out there, but I just wanted to quote, and I'm sure I'm using Philip Ace's comment here, is that in UTS, they have strongly moved towards active learning spaces. And I think there was one lecturer that says, I can't use these spaces to lecture. And the PVC said, well, it's not really made for lecture. I'm paraphrasing there, Philip, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a strong need to now um, direct higher education activities towards active learning, and it's important that the lecturer have to rethink the way they design learning activities. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the this session here. If you got any question on any things that I've covered here with Rachel, just feel free to email, and then we can talk about it a little bit more as well. But in the future, yeah, look out for the Learning Space portal, which will help with learning design for the spaces, and also using the technology in that space. Um, and if you've got any examples, really good examples of teaching activities, learning activities, please let me know, because I really want to, part of the university is about sharing, and also uh, celebrating all active learning champions. That includes us, DLT. So I'm always encouraging people to give me stuff, and then I can put it on the Learning Space portal and sharing it with different other websites as well, so that we celebrate what we do. Yeah, thanks, Pam. So how, it's a holistic strategy, yeah, how to help students acquire knowledge and how to help them understand how to apply it. Yep. Understanding is very important. So Nicole Mitchell is talking about, she's developing problem-based learning resources. So look out for that. And I'm sure I'll need some of that in my Learning Space portal.
Sorry, Phil. Everyone just added to that to think about the stuff that that you guys presented on today. Great job, by the way. Also, they can inform the bits that are written in the learning and teaching strategies in subject outline. So that's a heading that you need to address, and also, of course, in course space when it asks about pedagogical approaches and learning and teaching strategies in there as well. So I think it's nice to have some ideas and possibly some wording around that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, definitely would help. The the work inside course space, when, yeah, it does ask for learning strategies. Great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm just going to
Thank
press,
you.
yeah, I'm just going to press stop now in the record, and I'll see you around digitally and also physically. Thanks, everyone. Bye.